A 5'5" man with tattoos on his forearms just told a fox-eared woman with a $9,000 bounty on her tail that he'd burn down a national forest before he let anyone touch her. And the craziest part? 3 weeks earlier, the only thing this man loved was a teddy bear keychain named Gerald. This is the story of Eric Marsh. And it's the strangest, funniest, most heart-stopping love story you'll hear all year. Eric Marsh was 36 years old, 5'5" in boots, and covered in tattoos that told the story of a life he was actively trying to forget. 2 months before this story starts, his wife of 12 years sat him down at their kitchen table and told him she was leaving him for a man named Chad, who owned a boat dealership. Here's the twist. Eric wasn't devastated. Eric was relieved. Honestly, he told his buddy at the bar that night. Chad can have her. Chad can have the passive-aggressive sticky notes on the fridge. Chad can have the arguments about whose turn it is to load the dishwasher. I'm free. So when a firewatch position opened up in the Alaskan wilderness, 2 years, no roommates, no drama, just Eric, a fire tower, and 300 miles of untouched forest, he signed the contract before his coffee got cold. He packed light, clothes, boots, a Switch mobile phone, because for $50 a month he got unlimited data even out here, which felt like the one modern miracle he refused to live without, and clipped to his backpack zipper, a small, slightly threadbare teddy bear keychain. Its name was Gerald. Don't ask why. Eric couldn't fully explain it himself. He had no idea Gerald was about to become his only friend, his therapist, and eventually, his best man. The first 6 weeks of Firewatch were exactly what Eric expected. Quiet mornings, radio check-ins, watching for smoke that never came. He talked to Gerald constantly, because when you're 300 miles from the nearest human being, you either talk to a teddy bear or why? Oh, you talk to a tree, and Gerald at least had the decency to look like he was listening. Gerald, Eric said one evening, sitting on the tower steps with a can of beans, I think I've officially become the guy who names his keychain. This is who I am now. This is my personality. Gerald, being a teddy bear, said nothing, which honestly made him a great listener. Twice a month, a supply drone dropped crates near the base of the ridge. Food, batteries, the essentials of not dying alone in the Alaskan wilderness. Eric's job on drop day was simple. Hike down, grab the crates, hike back up. But on the 7th week, drop day went very, very differently. Because when Eric reached the clearing where the crates always landed, he found one of them already torn open, and crouched behind it, frozen mid-motion like a deer caught in headlights, was someone who was absolutely, definitely, 100% not supposed to exist out here. She was 4'11". Reddish-brown fur-tipped ears sat on top of her head, twitching with alarm. A long red foxtail flicked nervously behind her. Her eyes, sharp, amber, and terrified, locked onto Eric like she was calculating exactly how fast she could disappear into the tree line. Eric dropped his crate. Okay, he said slowly. So either I have finally, completely lost my mind out here, or you're real, and either way I think we both need a minute. She didn't run. That surprised him. She just stayed crouched, tail curled protectively around herself, watching him the way you'd watch a bear that hadn't decided yet if it was hungry. I'm not going to hurt you, Eric said, holding both hands up, one of which was still holding a can of beans. I'm the world's least threatening man. I'm 5'5". My emergency contact is a teddy bear. Something in her posture shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But curiosity. You can understand me? He asked. She nodded once, sharp and cautious. Okay, good. That's good. And then, from somewhere in the trees behind her, Eric heard something that made every hair on his arms stand up. Voices. Men's voices. And they were getting closer. The woman's ears flattened against her skull instantly. Her whole body went rigid. Hide, she whispered, the first word she'd said to him. Please. Now. Eric didn't ask questions. Something about the raw fear in her voice made questions feel like a luxury he didn't have time for. He grabbed her wrist, smaller than he expected, warm, and pulled her behind the torn supply crate, then behind a fallen log 15 feet into the brush. 2 men walked into the clearing moments later, rifles slung over their shoulders. Not hunting rifles for deer or moose. Eric knew guns, and these were built for something with a much higher price tag attached to its ears. Tracks lead here, one of them said. Fresh. She's close, said the other. You know what the ears alone go for? Never mind the tail. Whole set's worth more than my truck. Eric felt the woman beside him go completely still, holding her breath, her tail wrapped tight around her own legs like she was trying to make herself smaller than physically possible. And Eric, a man who 2 months ago couldn't work up the energy to argue about a dishwasher, felt something hot and unfamiliar rise up in his chest. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know anything about her. But he already knew he wasn't letting those men find her. The 2 men searched the clearing for what felt like an eternity, kicking through underbrush, checking the torn crate, muttering about how she couldn't have gone far. Eric's heart pounded so loud he was genuinely worried they'd hear it. Finally, one of them spat on the ground. She'll turn up. They always do. Radio the truck. We'll circle back at dusk. They walked off, boots crunching, voices fading into the tree line. Eric didn't move for a full minute after the sound disappeared. Neither did she. When he finally exhaled, she was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite place. Not fear anymore. Something closer to disbelief. You hid me, she said quietly. You don't even know me. Yeah, well, Eric said, standing up and brushing pine needles off his jacket. In my defense, I don't know anyone. I live in a tower and talk to a teddy bear. You're honestly the most exciting thing that's happened to me since a squirrel got into my food shed. That got something out of her, a startled, surprised huff of a laugh, quickly stifled like she wasn't used to laughing anymore. My name is Adriana, she said. Adriana Firetale. Eric Marsh, he replied. And that beat-up crate behind you technically belongs to the U.S. Forest Service, so, welcome to my jurisdiction, I guess. Adriana glanced at the tree line where the men had vanished. They'll come back, she said. They always come back. Over the next hour, sitting cross-legged in the dirt beside the ruined supply crate, Adriana told Eric her story in fragments, like she wasn't used to trusting anyone enough to say it all at once. Her people had come to Earth almost 20 years ago. Nobody Eric had ever met even knew that. There weren't many of them left, low 3 digits, she said, like it was a statistic she'd had memorized her entire life because it might one day be her number that dropped by 1. After first contact, most of her kind simply vanished from public record, hiding in remote corners of the world where humans rarely wandered. Places like 300 miles of untouched Alaskan wilderness. Hunting them was illegal. Fully, unambiguously illegal. That didn't stop the poachers. Because a single fox hybrid ear, dried and mount, Ed, could sell on the black market for more than most people made in a year. A tail, intact, for even more. There was a whole underground economy built on hunting a species that officially wasn't supposed to be hunted at all. So I run, Adriana said simply. I've been running for 6 years. Eric sat with that for a moment. Really sat with it, the way he hadn't let himself sit with anything in years. Well, he finally said, you're not running tonight. Tonight, you're eating beans in a fire tower with me and a teddy bear named Gerald, and honestly, Adriana, that might be the safest offer you get all week. She looked at him like she genuinely couldn't tell if he was insane or the kindest person she'd ever met. It was both. That night, in the fire tower, Eric introduced Adriana to Gerald with the seriousness of a man making a formal diplomatic introduction. Gerald, this is Adriana. Adriana, Gerald. Gerald's been with me since my divorce. He doesn't say much, but he's a phenomenal listener and he's never once told me I was wrong. Adriana picked up the little teddy bear keychain, turning it over in her hands, a small smile tugging at her mouth. You talk to a keychain. I talk to this specific keychain, Eric corrected. There's a difference. Gerald has a personality. Gerald has opinions. He just keeps them to himself, which honestly puts him ahead of most people I've met. Adriana laughed again, longer this time, real this time, and something about the sound of it filled the tiny fire tower in a way Eric hadn't felt since long before his marriage fell apart. She stayed that night, and the next, and the one after that. Eric radioed nothing, reported nothing. As far as the Forest Service knew, Firewatch operator Eric Marsh was simply doing his job, alone, exactly as scheduled. They had no idea his job now included teaching a fox hybrid woman how to play cards, arguing with her about whether ketchup belonged on eggs. It does not, she insisted. He disagreed, loudly, for 20 minutes, and falling, slowly, stupidly, completely, in love. But 300 miles of wilderness is a big place to hide. And somewhere out there, 2 men with rifles were still looking. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks that Eric would later describe, without a hint of exaggeration, as the best of his entire life. Adriana taught him things about the forest he'd never noticed in 7 weeks of Firewatch. How to read which birds went quiet when something dangerous was near, how to move without snapping a single branch, how to disappear so completely into the trees that even Eric, standing 10 feet away, sometimes lost track of exactly where she was. Eric taught her things too. How to use his Switch mobile phone. To watch old sitcoms on the nights the wind howled too loud to sleep. How to make his grandmother's chili recipe, adjusted slightly because they were cooking with Firewatch rations instead of a real kitchen. How it felt to have someone genuinely laugh at your jokes instead of sighing through them. You know, Adriana said one night, sitting beside him on the tower's narrow observation deck, watching the aurora bleed green and violet across the sky. I haven't stayed in one place this long since I came to this planet. Yeah, well, Eric said, I haven't wanted anyone to stay this long since. Actually, maybe ever. I think you've ruined me for solitude, Firetale. She turned to look at him, ears tilting forward with interest. Ruined you how? I used to be really good at being alone, Eric said. Now I keep thinking about what happens when I'm not. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that says everything words haven't caught up to yet. which is exactly when Gerald, perched on the railing where Eric had set him, fell off the tower. Gerald, Eric practically dove over the railing. Adriana grabbed the back of his jacket before he could actually launch himself off a 60-foot fire tower for a teddy bear. Eric, he's a keychain. He'll survive the fall. You don't know that. Gravity doesn't care about sentimental value. Adriana. They found Gerald the next morning, dusty but unharmed, wedged in the crook of a pine tree like the forest itself had decided to gently hand him back. Eric held him up, inspected him with the focus of a surgeon, and declared him fine, but shaken, before clipping him carefully back onto his belt loop. Adriana watched the entire ordeal with her arms crossed and the widest grin Eric had seen on her yet. You're ridiculous, she said. I'm loyal, Eric corrected. There's a difference. And for the record, I would have done the exact same thing for you. The grin faded slightly. Something more serious moved behind her amber eyes. Don't say things like that, she said quietly. Not unless you mean it. Eric stepped closer, close enough that her tail curled instinctively toward him instead of away. A small thing, but a thing he'd learned meant something, because Adriana never let her tail relax around anyone. Adriana, he said, I've never meant anything more in my life. And that, right there, 60 feet up a fire tower in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, was the exact moment two people who had absolutely no business falling for each other did exactly that. Neither of them heard the truck engine idling 3 ridges over. The poachers came back on a Tuesday. Eric was hauling firewood when he heard it. The distinct, wrong in this environment sound of a diesel engine grinding up the access road that wasn't supposed to have traffic for another 8 months. He dropped the wood and ran. Adriana was already at the window of the tower, ears pinned flat, every muscle coiled. 2 trucks, she said. That's new. They've never sent 2 before. Which means someone's confident. Eric felt that same hot, unfamiliar feeling from the clearing rise back up in his chest. Except this time it wasn't unfamiliar anymore. He knew exactly what it was. It was the feeling of a 5'5" man deciding that today he was going to be a much bigger problem than his height suggested. Okay, he said, grabbing the tower radio. Here's what's going to happen. You are not going out there alone. Not today, not ever again, as long as I have anything to say about it. Eric, this isn't your fight. Adriana. He turned to face her, dead serious, the joking entirely gone from his voice for maybe the first time since she'd met him. You are the best thing that has happened to me since I was old enough to remember. So yeah, it's my fight now. It's been my fight since the second I saw you hiding behind that crate. Outside, the truck stopped at the base of the ridge. Doors opened. Eric radioed the Forest Service dispatch with a voice so calm it surprised even him. This is Firewatch Tower 924. I need law enforcement and fish and wildlife out here immediately. I have visual confirmation of armed poachers targeting a protected sapient species. Repeat, armed poachers, 300 yards from my position, targeting a protected individual. Dispatch, understandably, needed him to repeat that twice. While he talked, Adriana paced behind him, tail lashing. They'll be here before help arrives. It's always been this way. Nobody ever gets here in time. Not this time, Eric said, hanging up the radio and grabbing his jacket. This time you've got me. And Gerald's seen things. Eric, this is not the moment for the teddy bear. There is always a moment for Gerald, Adriana. That's the whole point of Gerald. Despite everything, despite the fear plainly written across her face, Adriana let out a short, disbelieving laugh. The exact same reaction she'd had the very first night, and Eric filed it away as proof that even now, even here, he could still make her feel something other than afraid. Below, he heard boots on gravel, voices calling to each other, getting closer to the base of the tower. They know you're up here, Eric said, checking the door lock, which he immediately realized was laughably insufficient. They followed the truck straight to us. Adriana's ears flattened. Then they know about you too. Good, Eric said, grabbing the fire extinguisher off the wall. Not exactly a weapon, but the closest thing of I. Label. Let them. The first man up the tower stairs didn't expect Eric to be standing at the top of them. This is a federal fire lookout, Eric announced, planting himself directly in the doorway, arms crossed, doing his absolute best 5'5" impression of someone significantly larger. You're trespassing on U.S. Forest Service land, and I've already radioed dispatch with your truck plates. The poacher, a broad man with a rifle slung casually over his shoulder like he was used to people backing down, actually laughed. Move, little man. This isn't about you. Correction, Eric said. It's absolutely about me, because that woman behind me is under my protection, and if you take one more step up these stairs, I promise you the story you tell your buddies tonight is going to be a lot less flattering than we caught a fox hybrid. It's going to be we got beat down by a firewatch guy who's 5'5" and holding a fire extinguisher. For one beat, the poacher actually hesitated. Then he reached for his rifle strap, and that's when the second truck's radio crackled loudly enough to hear from the stairwell. Abort. Abort now. Wildlife enforcement inbound. County sheriff inbound. ETA 4 minutes. The poacher's face went white. Behind Eric, Adriana grabbed his arm, her grip tight with disbelief. They came. They actually came. Told you. Eric said, not taking his eyes off the man in the doorway. This time's different. The poacher swore, backed down 2 stairs, and shot Eric a look that promised this wasn't over. The kind of look men give when they're deciding whether pride is worth the risk of federal charges. Pride lost. He turned and bolted down the tower stairs, shouting to his partner below. Eric didn't move from the doorway until he heard both truck engines roar to life and tear back down the access road, gravel spraying, tires screaming against the dirt. Only then did his knees remind him that he'd been running on pure adrenaline. He sat down hard on the top step, fire extinguisher still clutched in one white-knuckled hand. Okay, he said, voice shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. Okay, that happened. Adriana dropped down beside him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. Then, without warning, she pulled him into a hug so tight it nearly knocked the wind out of him. You stood in a doorway, she said into his shoulder, against 2 armed men with a fire extinguisher. In my defense, Eric said, muffled, it's a very heavy fire extinguisher. You could have died. Adriana, look at me. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I told you back at the clearing, I don't know anyone out here. I live alone in a tower with a teddy bear. And then you showed up, and for the first time since my divorce, I actually had a reason to be scared of losing something. So yeah, I stood in a doorway. I'd stand in 100 doorways for you. Below, in the distance, sirens finally began echoing up the ridge. Wildlife enforcement and the county sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, and what followed was, in Eric's words, the single strangest paperwork process of my entire life. Explaining a fox-human hybrid to law enforcement went about as smoothly as you'd expect, which is to say, not smoothly at all. But Adriana, calm, articulate, and clearly practiced at this exact nightmare scenario, walked them through her species-protected status, the 20-year history since first contact, and the underground poaching network that had been hunting her people in plain sight for years, ignored by everyone who wasn't directly affected. The lead officer, a weathered woman named Sergeant Okafor, listened to all of it with her jaw increasingly tight. We've had whispers about this ring for 2 years, she finally said. Never had a witness willing to testify. Never had anyone brave enough. She's not just a witness, Eric said, stepping in front of Adriana instinctively, protectively. The way he'd apparently decided was now just his default setting around her. She's under my protection. Anything you need from her, you go through me first. Sergeant Okafor raised an eyebrow, glancing between the 5'5" firewatch operator and the deadly serious expression on his face. You're really willing to go to bat for her? Testimony, federal case, the whole thing? That's not a small commitment, Mr. Marsh. Eric didn't hesitate for even a second. Ma'am, I once threatened 2 armed poachers with a fire extinguisher. I think we're well past small commitment at this point. The weeks that followed moved fast. Adriana's testimony, combined with truck plates, radio intercepts, and a trail of black market records federal agents had been quietly building for months, finally cracked the poaching ring wide open. 6 arrests. 2 more still pending. The kind of case, Sergeant Okafor admitted, that doesn't happen without someone brave enough to stop running and start talking. Eric's Firewatch contract technically still had over a year left on it. Nobody at the Forest Service office quite knew what to do with the fact that their solitary fire lookout now had a permanent, very much not solitary companion. A companion who, as it turned out, was excellent at spotting smoke plumes from twice the distance any human could manage. Thanks to a sense of smell Eric was still learning to be impressed by instead of mildly unsettled by. Officially, the district supervisor told Eric over the radio, sounding thoroughly exhausted by the entire situation, I don't know anything about this. Unofficially, keep doing whatever you're doing, because your fire reports have never been more accurate. Eric took that as a full endorsement. That and I, GHD, sitting on the observation deck with Adriana's head resting against his shoulder and Gerald propped up on the railing like a tiny, silent chaperone. Eric finally said the thing he'd been building toward for weeks. Adriana Firetale, he said, I came out here to get away from love. I was done with it. I had a teddy bear and a phone plan, and I thought that was enough. And now I think I came out here to actually find it. Just took the universe a minute to deliver. Adriana lifted her head, amber eyes catching the last light of the aurora overhead, and for once, her tail didn't curl away or tense with old fear. It settled, relaxed, warm against Eric's side, like it had finally, truly, found somewhere safe to stay. For the record, she said, I don't think the universe delivers a 5'5" man with a fire extinguisher and a teddy bear named Gerald to just anyone. No, Eric agreed, pulling her closer. I think it only does that once. 2 years of Firewatch. That's what Eric Marsh signed up for. A quiet contract, a quiet tower, a quiet life 300 miles from anyone. Instead, he found the loudest, bravest, most unexpected love story of his entire life. One that started behind a torn supply crate, survived armed poachers with nothing but a fire extinguisher and pure stubbornness, and ended with a man who once thought he was done with love, discovering he'd simply never met the right person to fight for. And somewhere on that railing, catching the aurora's glow, Gerald the teddy bear kept watch over both of them. Exactly like he always had. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share with your friends. And from all of us here at HI Beyond the Stars, let us know in the comments who your Gerald is and where you're from. Till next time, love can find you anywhere, even in a fire tower in the middle of nowhere.